Hello everybody, my name is Holly and today we're going to be talking very briefly about primary sources and how to analyze them as well as how they differ from secondary sources. And we're going to use examples of sources that pertain to life in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. So let's get started. So our objectives are to learn more about the life of Japanese American teenagers in internment camps, use critical thinking skills to analyze primary sources, and to find correlations between your life and the life of Stanley Hayami. So let's start with what is a primary source. A primary source can be an object or some sort of written piece at any given time in history. So it's analyzing something that is happening right now. So a person is making an object or they are writing something about the time period that they are currently living in, what they are experiencing. Primary sources help us connect and learn from firsthand accounts throughout history. Now they differ from secondary sources because secondary sources are sources that were written or created by scholars after the event had already happened. So these people either weren't actually there or weren't born yet during this time, but they used primary sources to collect their own thoughts and maybe write an article or something later down the road. That would be a secondary source. So that's the way they differ. So we're going to do a quick activity. Can you spot the primary source? So here I have 3 different articles, and I just want you guys to take a second and kind of look at them. You don't have to read them if you don't want to. Just kind of take a quick once over and try to figure out which one you think is the primary source and why. So if you want to pause this video, you can come back to it in a couple minutes once you've gathered your thoughts. Otherwise, let's move on. And this one is the primary source. So the reason for that being, if you look up here, outlined in red, the date that this was published and written was 1942. So that would make this a primary source because this was happening at this time period when this was written. So the Japanese were actually being evacuated in the US and Canada and being sent to these camps. So this would be a reliable source to kind of look at and analyze if you're doing any research on this time period. So now we're going to switch gears. Stanley Hayami, he was a high schooler and a Japanese American who kept a journal during his time at the internment camp called Heart Mountain Camp. He and his family were forced into camps after FDR signed Executive Order 9066 during World War II. Once he was freed from the internment camp, Stanley joined the U.S. Army and was unfortunately killed in combat while helping a fellow soldier in 1945. He was only 19. So his journal is now preserved in the Japanese American National Museum, which is where I've gotten these screenshots coming up. So when we're thinking of Stanley's journal and primary sources, why do you think his journal would be considered a primary source? So you can think about what constitutes something being a primary source. It would be the time it was written. So that would be one reason that his journal would be considered a primary source. And you can think to yourself this next question, what value do you think his thoughts and experiences have nowadays? So you looking back, reading everything about his experiences, what do his experiences tell you about this time period? So if you want to go ahead and pause this video right now and kind of read this quick excerpt from his journal and kind of take notes on whatever sticks out to you, mental notes, whatever, and then you can come back to the video and we're going to kind of discuss how we feel about this excerpt. So welcome back. So we're going to say what stood out to you. Did you notice anything about his writing style, such as grammar or spelling? What are your thoughts about Stanley's view of the camps? Do you think Stanley is a viable source to learn what it was like? Why or why not? We ask us these questions because we are going to use our critical thinking skills, which is super important when you're analyzing a primary source. So you can look deeply at the physical object as well as the intent of the writing or the reason for its creation. So it's really important to ask yourself these questions when you are analyzing a primary source. So now we're going to take a look. This is the actual photocopy of this excerpt that you had just read in the previous slides. So if you can kind of scroll through. So now let's analyze this. So we're going to start with the questions: who, what, when, where, why, the audience. So who, it would be Stanley Hayami as the author. What, this would be a diary or personal journal. When, this was around 1943. Where, he was writing this at the Heart Mountain internment camp. And why, you can probably think of different reasons why. Maybe he was keeping a log just to kill time, or he just wanted to be able to reflect back on these experiences. And I would also argue that the audience of this journal would be himself. Maybe he eventually wanted people to find it, but at the time he was writing it, it was for himself. So now when you're analyzing a primary source, you can also do a physical analysis. So what is it made of? If it's in front of you, can you see any tears or weathering? Is it written in ink or pencil? What's its medium? Different questions like that. You kind of just look at the physical object. So for this one, it was notebook paper, something that you and I would have. It's not really in front of us, but from the photographs you can tell that the paper has aged. It looks a little yellower. And is it written in ink or pencil? Probably actually pen is what I'm thinking, because if you actually look back, you can see little parts that have been scratched out. And if you have a pencil, you most likely have an eraser, and you would just erase instead of cross out. So that's one way, if you don't actually know what it's written in. So that's how we analyze. So let's take a look at another source, and we're going to kind of do a little activity again. So if you want to pause the video and take a look at this up close, you can. This is dated December 31st, 1944, and it's actually like a registry of Japanese Americans that were taken into internment camps. Alright, so list of registrations for Japanese American evacuees. So go ahead and write on a piece of paper or in your head, answer the who, what, when, where, why, audience, and do a quick physical analysis. You can pause the video and come back if you want. Just really think about those questions that we had just gone over. So that, in a nutshell, is how to analyze a primary source and how it differs from secondary sources. So I hope this was these couple of exercises were helpful, and you've learned a little bit more about life in a Japanese internment camp as well. And thanks for watching. Bye.